Only the so-called angry humans came to the rescue. The sky was clear over Earth's capital, but beneath that peaceful sky, a storm was brewing. The world had no idea what was coming. It had started like any other normal day. People went about their daily routines, unaware that the very fabric of their existence was about to be torn apart. Out in space, the Zornax Empire's fleet, the most feared and advanced military force in the galaxy, was closing in on Earth. The humans had been observed, studied, and dismissed by the galactic powers. They were known for being unpredictable and often seen as too angry to be taken seriously. Other species saw their temper as a weakness, an emotional flaw that could be easily controlled. But they were wrong. Captain Noah Mendez was stationed at Earth's Defense Command when the alarms went off. His team had been tracking unknown ships for days, but they never anticipated that the aliens were already here. "Captain, the fleet is entering Earth's orbit," one of his officers said, their voice shaking. "It's them, the Zornax, they're here." Mendez stood tall, his brown eyes narrowing as he watched the holographic map of Earth's space. The Zornax were no longer a threat to be studied from afar. They were right on their doorstep. Their dark warships blocked out the stars as they descended toward Earth's atmosphere. The human defenses had only been meant to deter small-scale attacks, not something like this. "We need to launch the counteroffensive," Mendez ordered. His tone was calm, but his mind was racing. Earth's defenses were outdated and underfunded. No one expected this kind of invasion, and yet here they were. Mendez's thoughts raced back to the days when Earth's leaders had laughed at the idea of a real galactic threat. Humanity was too angry, they said, too emotional, too dangerous. No one wanted to believe that a race capable of such wrath could be a real threat. But now Earth was paying the price for underestimating their own. The sky above the capital turned dark as the first wave of Zornax ships released their devastating payload. The shockwaves rocked the city, and the streets filled with panic. People ran in every direction, trying to escape the sudden chaos. Buildings crumbled. Cars were thrown through the air like toys. Mendez's first instinct was to order an immediate counterattack, but the reality of the situation hit him like a punch to the gut. The Zornax were far too advanced. Their ships were capable of cloaking and deploying energy shields that rendered Earth's weapons useless. The humans were outmatched in every way. As the first few moments of devastation passed, Mendez knew that the only way Earth could survive this attack was by fighting smarter, not harder. The Zornax had underestimated humanity's resilience. They thought the humans were only dangerous when provoked. But this time they had provoked a sleeping giant. Mendez turned to his crew, his voice steady despite the growing sense of urgency. "Prepare to launch the resistance," he said. "Contact every available human military group. We're not just going to fight back. We're going to make them regret ever coming to Earth." The words weren't just for his team. They were for himself. Deep down, Mendez had always known humanity's strength was its anger. The rage that had been misunderstood for so long could now be their greatest asset. And this was the moment to unleash it. In the chaos of the initial attack, humanity began to rise up. People who had been living their normal lives, unaware of the coming invasion, now found themselves in the fight of their lives. No longer were they fighting for mere survival. They were fighting for their home, their freedom, and their future. A small group of resistance fighters, led by former soldiers and civilians alike, quickly began organizing themselves. The Zornax Empire had anticipated that Earth's military would crumble under the weight of their invasion. They hadn't counted on the humans' stubbornness, their refusal to back down when the stakes were high. In the underground resistance base, Mendez gathered his team. "We may be outmatched, but we have something they don't," he said, his voice fierce. "We have the anger, the drive to protect our home, and that is something they will never understand." As Earth's people began to regroup, Mendez led his team on small but strategic missions to disrupt the Zornax forces. They didn't have the resources for a full-scale war, but they did have something better: guerrilla tactics and an unmatched will to win. Humanity, known throughout the galaxy for their unpredictability and their anger, was now fighting back. The Zornax Empire had made a grave mistake in underestimating this weak species. The so-called angry humans were going to show them what that anger could do. Mendez didn't know what would happen in the coming days or weeks. The Zornax had the numbers, the firepower, and the technology. But humanity had the one thing the aliens couldn't predict: the unrelenting spirit to fight, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. The war for Earth had just begun, and humanity was ready to show the galaxy what they were really made of. The battle for Earth had only just begun, but the resistance was already gaining ground. The Zornax Empire had underestimated the humans, and now they were feeling the sting of that mistake. The alien fleet had struck Earth with overwhelming force, but the humans, driven by their fierce anger and desire to protect their home, refused to back down. Captain Noah Mendez stood on the bridge of the human flagship, watching as the holographic map of Earth's orbit flickered. His team had managed to destroy several key Zornax command ships, and the Zornax forces were beginning to retreat, if only temporarily. Humanity was striking back with everything they had, but the victory wasn't without its cost. Earth's major cities were in ruins, and millions of civilians were trapped in the crossfire. The world was devastated, but it wasn't broken. Humanity had always been a species capable of bouncing back, no matter how many times it had been knocked down. It was that same spirit, that unyielding anger, that was driving them to fight back. Mendez took a deep breath, his thoughts heavy. He had led his team through countless battles, but this felt different. This wasn't just another mission. This was personal. The Zornax weren't just invaders, they were a threat to everything humanity stood for. They were a reminder of all the forces that had tried to crush Earth's spirit in the past. "Captain, the Zornax fleet is regrouping. They're bringing in reinforcements," one of Mendez's officers reported, breaking his thoughts. Mendez clenched his fists. "We're not going to let them take over our home. Prepare the counteroffensive. We've got to keep the pressure on them." Humanity's anger, long seen as a flaw, had now become their greatest weapon. Mendez knew that the galaxy's elite had viewed humans as emotional and unpredictable, but they were also resilient. The humans had a fire inside them that no alien force could extinguish. The Zornax had learned that lesson the hard way. As the days passed, the resistance grew. Soldiers, civilians, and even ordinary citizens with no combat training rallied to fight back. The anger that had once been dismissed as a weakness now united them all. The streets were filled with makeshift weaponry and homemade armor as people banded together to protect what was theirs. The Zornax were not prepared for the fierce determination of the human race. In hidden bunkers across the globe, Mendez met with his key leaders. They had to make quick decisions, not just for Earth's survival, but for the survival of every race enslaved by the Zornax. Earth had always been a symbol of freedom, and now it was the last hope for those under the alien empire's oppressive rule. "We've got to hit them where it hurts," Mendez said, his voice steady. "We know their supply lines are weak. If we can disrupt their logistics, we can cripple their entire operation." His team nodded in agreement, and plans were quickly drawn up. While Earth's military had been overwhelmed in the beginning, the humans' ability to adapt and improvise was beginning to show. The resistance now had a solid foothold, and Mendez could feel a sense of hope rising in the ranks. But there was still a long road ahead. The Zornax Empire was relentless, and their resources were vast. The human forces, on the other hand, were scattered and under-equipped. Mendez knew they had to strike fast and decisively, or the Zornax would crush them with sheer numbers. The first mission was to infiltrate a Zornax supply base on the moon. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the perfect opportunity to cripple the enemy's reinforcements before they could reach Earth. Mendez's team, along with a group of elite resistance fighters, prepared to launch a daring assault. As they boarded their ships, Mendez couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. The fate of Earth and of countless other worlds rested on their success. If they failed, there would be no turning back. The Zornax would wipe out humanity, just as they had done to so many other civilizations before. "Let's show them what humanity is capable of," Mendez said, his voice filled with determination. The resistance fighters cheered, their anger and determination burning in their eyes. They were no longer just defending their homes. They were fighting for their freedom, for their future, and for the survival of every species oppressed by the Zornax. The mission was dangerous, and the odds were against them. But the humans had something the Zornax didn't, a fire that couldn't be quenched. No matter how many times they were knocked down, they would always get back up. As the resistance ships made their way to the moon, Mendez thought back to the early days of the invasion. Humanity had been caught off guard, unprepared for such an assault. But now, with their backs against the wall, they had found their strength. They had found their anger. The Zornax may have thought they were conquering a weak, emotional species, but they were wrong. The humans were angry, yes, but it was that anger that gave them the power to fight back. And as the battle for Earth raged on, Mendez knew that this was just the beginning. The Zornax had no idea what they had unleashed. The sound of gunfire echoed across the broken streets of what was once Earth's thriving capital. The city was now a war zone, filled with the scars of battle. Buildings that had once been towering symbols of human achievement now lay in ruins, crumbling under the weight of alien assault. The streets were empty, save for the occasional resistance fighter, their faces covered in soot and sweat, their eyes burning with determination. Earth was at war, but humanity was far from giving up. Captain Noah Mendez stood on the edge of a rooftop, looking down at the battlefield. His face was hard, his jaw clenched, but inside a fire raged. The Zornax Empire had made a mistake. They thought they could conquer Earth, that they could break humanity's spirit with overwhelming force. They had underestimated the anger that fueled the human race. "We need to hit them now before they regroup," Mendez said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of urgency. He turned to his team, all of them battle-hardened and resolute. "The Zornax have already shown their power, but they haven't seen what we can do when we fight back with everything we have." His team nodded, understanding the stakes. The first few days of the invasion had been chaos. Earth's military was outmatched, and civilians were caught in the crossfire. But now, after weeks of resistance, humanity had found its footing. The Zornax had pushed Earth to the brink, but they had also awakened something that could not be stopped. The human spirit was stronger than any alien force. The battle had reached a critical point. The Zornax were preparing for a major offensive, planning to wipe out the remaining pockets of resistance in the capital. But the humans had something the Zornax didn't, a deep, unyielding rage that came from being pushed to the edge. Mendez and his team had learned how to use the Zornax's technology against them. They had infiltrated alien supply bases, sabotaged communication lines, and struck at the heart of the invaders' operations. Each victory, no matter how small, sent a clear message. The humans would not be crushed. Today, they were going to take the fight directly to the Zornax's most powerful weapon, their flagship. It was an imposing, massive ship, capable of destroying entire cities with a single blast. If they could destroy the flagship, they would cripple the Zornax's invasion and buy humanity the time they desperately needed to regroup and plan their next move. "We take out that ship, we take out their command. The invasion will crumble," Mendez said, his eyes focused on the distant silhouette of the Zornax flagship. "This is our chance. We take the fight to them, and we make sure they regret ever coming to Earth." The plan was simple, but dangerous. Mendez and his team would infiltrate the flagship while a small group of resistance fighters created a diversion. It was a high-risk mission, but the stakes were too high for hesitation. The Zornax had attacked humanity with no warning, no mercy. Now it was time for humanity to show them what they were capable of. The team moved quickly, each member knowing their role. They had trained for this moment, prepared for this battle. And as they made their way through the war-torn streets, there was no fear in their hearts, only the burning desire to fight for their survival. The assault on the flagship was swift. The team slipped through the Zornax defenses, using their knowledge of alien technology to disable security systems. They moved like shadows, their footsteps silent on the cold metal floors of the flagship. As they reached the heart of the ship, they planted explosives in key areas, ready to destroy the ship from the inside out. But just as they were about to leave, an alarm blared. The Zornax had realized they had been infiltrated. The flagship was on high alert, and the team had no choice but to fight their way out. "Get to the escape pods," Mendez shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We can't stay here. Get out now." The battle was fierce. Zornax soldiers poured into the corridors, their advanced weapons firing relentlessly. But humanity fought back with everything they had. They were angry, they were desperate, and they weren't about to let these aliens win. Mendez led the charge, taking down one Zornax after another with ruthless efficiency. His team followed, moving as one, each member covering the other. They fought with the kind of fury that could only come from knowing they were fighting for their very existence. As they reached the escape pods, Mendez glanced back at the destruction they had caused. The Zornax flagship was now a ticking time bomb. The explosives they had planted would ensure that it would never threaten Earth again. "We did it," one of his team members said, breathless from the fight. Mendez nodded, his eyes fixed on the escape pods. "We're not done yet, but this is a start." As the escape pods launched into space, the team watched as the Zornak's flagship erupted in a massive explosion, lighting up the night sky. The humans had struck a blow against the invaders, one that would be felt across the galaxy. They had taken the fight to the Zornaks, and they had won. But even as the team celebrated their victory, Mendez knew this was just the beginning. The Zornaks were not going to give up easily. The war for Earth was far from over, but humanity had proven something that day. They had proven that they were not just angry, they were capable of fighting for their survival, no matter the cost. The Zornaks had come to Earth thinking they could crush the humans. But they had underestimated humanity's greatest strength, their anger, their rage, and their refusal to back down. And as Mendez looked out at the stars, he knew one thing for sure: humanity was not going to lose this war. Not now, not ever. The battle for Earth had reached a turning point. After the destruction of the Zornak's flagship, humanity had gained a vital victory, but the war was far from over. The Zornak's empire was regrouping, and they weren't going to let this setback stop them. Earth's capital lay in ruins, and the planet's once proud defenses were crippled. Yet, as devastated as Earth was, there was a fierce determination growing among the human survivors. They had shown the galaxy what they could do when pushed to the edge. Now the question was whether they could finish what they had started. Captain Noah Mendez stood before a large map of the war-torn Earth, studying the enemy's movements. The Zornaks had fallen back, but they weren't retreating. They were regrouping, gathering strength for a final assault. The fight had moved from the streets of Earth to a more deadly battleground space. The Zornaks had brought in reinforcements, and their massive fleet now threatened to overwhelm the remaining human forces. "Captain, we've got word from the front lines," Lieutenant Parker said, stepping up beside Mendez. "The Zornaks are mobilizing for a counterattack. They've regrouped faster than we expected." Mendez nodded grimly. The Zornaks were relentless. They wouldn't stop until they had crushed humanity completely. But humanity had shown it was capable of far more than anyone had thought. They had taken on the most advanced alien empire in the galaxy and survived. They had taken a stand not just for Earth, but for every species that had suffered under the Zornaks' rule. "We're not going to sit here and wait for them to hit us again," Mendez said, his voice firm. "We're going to hit them first. We've got one shot at this. If we can strike at their homeworld, we cripple their entire empire." The idea was risky. Taking the fight to the heart of the Zornaks' empire was no small task. It meant launching a full-scale assault on their capital, a fortress surrounded by the most advanced defenses in the galaxy. But it was the only way to end the war. If they didn't take action now, Earth would be lost. Mendez gathered his team of resistance fighters, those who had been with him since the beginning. They had become more than just soldiers, they were family. Together they had faced impossible odds, and together they would finish this war. "We'll need every available ship. Every fighter we can muster," Mendez said, looking around at his team. "If we're going to do this, we need to move fast. We strike hard and we strike fast." The plan was set into motion. The resistance would launch a surprise attack on the Zornak's capital. It was their only chance to defeat the enemy once and for all. Every ship, every weapon, every fighter would be needed. There could be no room for failure. As Mendez prepared to leave, he couldn't help but think about the journey that had led them to this moment. From the early days of the invasion, when Earth had been caught off guard and outmatched, to this final stand, humanity had proven time and again that they were not a species to be underestimated. The Zornaks had thought they could crush humanity with their advanced weapons and their vast numbers. They had underestimated the one thing the humans had that no other species could match: the will to fight, no matter the odds. The journey had been painful. The loss of friends, of family, the destruction of their homes, all of it weighed heavily on the survivors. But now, as Mendez and his team prepared for their most dangerous mission yet, there was a sense of hope in the air. Humanity had been knocked down time and again, but they had never stayed down for long. The Zornaks had learned that lesson, and now the humans were about to teach them another. The battle for Earth had been hard, but the war was far from over. Humanity's victory was still uncertain, but they were determined to finish what they had started. There was no turning back now. As the fleet of human ships took off, heading toward the heart of the Zornak's empire, Mendez couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He had fought alongside these people, and he knew they would not stop until the job was done. They were angry, yes, but they were also resolute, and that was a strength the Zornax would never understand. The final assault on the Zornax capital was nothing short of chaotic. Ships clashed in the vastness of space, the sound of explosions and the flashes of energy blasts lighting up the darkness. The Zornax had thrown everything they had at the humans, but the humans were relentless. Every ship that fell, every life lost, only fueled their determination to win. Mendez led the charge, directing the Resistance's fighters as they stormed the Zornax capital. The city, once a symbol of the Zornax Empire's power, now lay in ruins, just like the cities on Earth. The Zornax were realizing too late that the humans were no longer the weak, emotional species they had thought. They were fighters, and they would do whatever it took to defend their home. As Mendez and his team neared the heart of the Zornax capital, they encountered fierce resistance. Zornax soldiers and advanced war machines were everywhere, and the fighting was brutal. But the humans fought with everything they had, their anger driving them forward. They were not just fighting for Earth anymore. They were fighting for the freedom of every race that had suffered under the Zornax's rule. In the midst of the battle, Mendez found himself face to face with the Zornax leader, a towering figure whose eyes burned with fury. The Zornax had underestimated the humans, but now they were paying the price. "You're too late," the Zornax leader sneered, his voice cold. "The Empire is vast. Even if you destroy us here, others will come. You cannot win." Mendez's gaze was steady, unflinching. "We'll keep fighting. As long as we breathe, we'll keep fighting. You won't break us." With that, he lunged forward, taking down the Zornax leader with a swift blow. The Resistance fighters surged forward, pushing deeper into the heart of the Zornax capital. The battle raged on, but the tide was turning. The Zornax had underestimated humanity's anger, and now they were facing the consequences. The war was not over yet, but humanity had proven something that day. They had proven that they would never give up. They had proven that their anger, their will to fight, was a force to be reckoned with. And as Mendez looked around at the survivors, he knew that this fight, no matter how hard it had been, had shown the galaxy that humanity could never be broken. The final battle had left Earth scarred and broken, but humanity stood strong. The Zornax Empire, once feared across the galaxy for its advanced technology and unstoppable forces, was crumbling. Their invasion of Earth had failed, and the fight for survival had awakened something in humanity that no alien force had ever anticipated: an unbreakable will to protect their home, their people, and their future. As the last remnants of the Zornax fleet retreated, Mendez stood on the ruined outskirts of Earth's capital, looking out over the devastation. His uniform was torn, and his face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but there was a sense of peace in his eyes. The war wasn't over, but they had won. They had proven that no matter how impossible the odds, humanity would fight with everything they had. And it was that rage, that anger, which had fueled their victory. For the first time in weeks, Mendez allowed himself a moment to reflect. When the Zornax had first arrived, humanity had been unprepared, caught off guard by the scale of the invasion. But what they had lacked in military power, they made up for with their relentless spirit. They had fought back not just as soldiers, but as people whose very existence was being threatened. And now they had won. The human forces had pushed the Zornax back, but the cost had been high. Earth was in ruins, and millions had lost their lives. The human race had been brought to its knees, but they had stood tall, refusing to back down. In the heart of the Zornax capital, Mendez had faced their leader and struck the final blow that sealed the Zornax's fate. But even in victory, there was no time to rest. "Captain, we've received word from the fleet," Lieutenant Parker said, approaching Mendez. "The Zornax forces are retreating, but the rest of their empire is still out there. We may have won this battle, but the war isn't over." Mendez nodded, his expression hard. The Zornax might have been defeated, but the galaxy was still a dangerous place. The empire they had built had far-reaching influence, and there were still factions loyal to their cause. But for the first time, humanity had a chance to shape its own future. "We'll rebuild," Mendez said, his voice steady. "We've shown the galaxy what humanity is capable of. No one is going to stop us now." The days following the Zornax's defeat were filled with a mixture of relief and grief. Earth's survivors worked together to clear the rubble and begin the long process of rebuilding. The human race had lost so much, but they had also gained something that could never be taken from them: their freedom. And now they had a chance to forge a future where they were no longer at the mercy of oppressive empires. Mendez stood before a group of survivors, soldiers, and leaders from all corners of Earth. They had fought together, and they would rebuild together. "This isn't the end," he said to them, his voice carrying the weight of everything they had been through. "This is the beginning of something new. We will never forget what happened, but we will never let it define us. We fought for our home, and now we'll build a future we can be proud of." The people cheered, a sense of hope rising in their hearts. They had been tested, pushed to their limits, and yet they had endured. They had stood together against an enemy that had underestimated them, and they had won. The anger that had once been seen as a weakness had become their greatest strength. And now, as Earth began to rebuild, humanity was ready to take its place in the galaxy, not as a forgotten species, but as a force to be reckoned with. Mendez watched as the survivors began to work together, clearing the debris and setting up makeshift shelters. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of hope. Humanity had been through so much, but they had survived, and now they had the chance to build something better. As the days passed, the resistance leaders and Mendez's team worked to establish a new government, one that would represent the will of the people, not the interests of powerful empires. The war had been a wake-up call, not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy. The Zornax might have been the first to invade Earth, but they would not be the last. Humanity had learned a valuable lesson. They could no longer be complacent. They had to stand ready not just for the future of Earth, but for the future of the galaxy. Mendez stood with his team as they looked out at the rebuilding city. They had fought hard to get to this point, and they had paid a heavy price. But they had won. The Zornax Empire had been brought to its knees, and humanity had proven its strength. They were no longer the underdogs, the angry species that no one took seriously. They were a force that could not be ignored. "We've done it," one of Mendez's team members said, his voice filled with awe. Mendez smiled, though the weight of everything they had been through was still heavy on his heart. "We've won," he said, "but the real work begins now." Humanity had taken its first step toward becoming a true power in the galaxy. The Zornax Empire had underestimated them, but they had learned the hard way. Humanity was not to be underestimated. They had fought with everything they had, and now they would rise from the ashes of war, stronger than ever before. And as Mendez looked out at the rebuilding world, he knew that humanity's story was just beginning. They had fought for their survival, and now they would fight for their future. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity stood up, defied the odds, and proved that only the so-called angry humans would come to the rescue.